Welcome, my friends, to the Alyosha Society. We're going to keep on pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. You may have noticed something. Mr. Etter, you're throwing us for a loop here. I don't know what to do. You have on a different shirt from the shirt that you were wearing in the opening videos. Yeah. I normally wear the same shirt throughout a book study, and I don't change. And usually it has some significance. The color has some connection to the book, the story, the ideas, theme, whatever. I did that on purpose. Can you figure out why? I'll tell you what. Think about the worldview we're dealing with. Think about Albert Camus. And before you watch the next video, no, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. Before you watch the next video, try to figure out, why would he wear a different shirt? All right, we'll get to that. Let's go ahead. I just want to take a super quick look at where we're going to be headed. This is the only slide, believe it or not. I know I'm usually just full of slides. Nope, not in this one. We're just going to have talk time and walk through the story. But this is indeed video number 3 out of 6 total. We've had 2 introductory videos, lots of history, Enlightenment, Romanticism, World War I, Age of Despair. We've talked about the impossible dilemma. I gave you literary devices to look for. We looked at the life of Camus. We looked at Northern Africa, Algeria, French. Now we're actually ready to get into dun, dun, dun. There it is. Now it's official. The slide says, let's get into the story. So yeah, we better do it. All right. If you have your copy of The Stranger, open up. Now, I usually try to make sure that you guys know what version I'm using so you can get the same version. I am using this vintage publication of The Stranger. It looks like this. You may have possibly a version that's kind of the black and white. I think, yeah, because that I think this is an older cover. It may just help with the page numbers a little bit. All right, let's get right to it. Now let's tie in all of that history, philosophy, background, context that we've spent all that quality time in the first 2 videos. We open up with our protagonist at a funeral, or at least getting ready for a funeral. Opening lines. Who died? That's right, his mother. So his mother has died, and that's how the story begins. Kind of morbid, isn't it? Well, I'll tell you what, the story's going to end with a death. So this story is sort of bookended with death. Before we move on, I can't resist. I got to talk to you a little bit about an essay that Albert Camus wrote, very famous essay called The Myth of Sisyphus. Now, I'm going to be talking later about what the ancient myth of Sisyphus meant. So I'm going to spend more time on that later. I don't want to get into that right now. I just want to read the opening lines of this famous essay. Listen to what Camus says. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Wow. He says there's only one serious philosophical question. Are you going to commit suicide or not? Why? What are you talking? Why would anybody want to? Because of the impossible dilemma, because of the absurdity of the universe, because of the meaninglessness, the purposelessness, and the reality that there never will be any purpose or meaning to any of it. So the first question is, are you going to just commit suicide? And Camus doesn't think that's a terrible option. He doesn't think that's the best option, but he understands that is kind of sort of a logical end of this worldview. He goes on to say this: judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. You see what he's saying here, guys? Camus was very much obsessed with death. He was very much obsessed with the question of whether or not life had any meaning, but at the same time, whether or not death would have any meaning at all. And as far as he could tell, neither had any larger, we call it a telos. We use the Greek word telos if you want to, sound really smart at dinner parties. It means goal or end result or purpose behind it. And Camus concluded death doesn't have a telos and life doesn't have a telos. So he begins with his mother's funeral. Notice just even in this, remember I told you to look for this very right to the point, no frills, terse style of writing. Mama died today or yesterday, maybe. I don't know. I got a telegram from the home. Mother deceased. Funeral tomorrow. Faithfully yours. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. See that? The opening paragraph sets the tone of the philosophy. It sort of parallels the philosophy of meaninglessness. It's just right to the point. Mom died, but to be honest with you, it really doesn't matter either way. Mom lives, okay. Mom dies, okay, because there's just no real purpose or meaning to any of it. Anyway, now remember I also told you in those literary devices, I said, look for references to the sun, look for references to heat. Now, I also told you to look for references to little mundane indicators of the impossible dilemma. Now, do you remember the impossible dilemma? Guys, that's what this whole thing is about. If you forgot that, you better go back and watch video number 2. You got to get that. The impossible dilemma is the reality that we want there to be meaning and purpose in life. We crave it, we long for it, but there isn't, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you got to decide how you're going to respond and how you're going to live in light of that absurdity. That's what I call the impossible. That wasn't Camus' term, by the way. That's just a term I made up. That seems to me I understand that phrase, impossible dilemma. It's a dilemma, it's a problem, and there is no solution to it according to this worldview. Now, skip a few pages up. If you have the vintage, you have the same version. I'm on page 9, but here's what I think is the first one. Now, remember, this whole setting here is the preparing for the funeral of his mother and all the events surrounding the remembering and honoring his mother's life. So the paragraph I have begins, at one point he said, your mother's friends will be coming to the vigil too. It's customary. I have to get some chairs and some black coffee. I asked him if he could, and again, this is written in first person singular narration. Merceau, the protagonist, is our hero in this story, right? I asked him if he could turn off one of the lights. The glare on the white walls was kind of making me drowsy. You ever get that feeling? You're sitting in class, it's way too early in the morning, maybe even a sermon. And the lights are on and maybe there's a glare and you're like, Some of you are thinking, yeah, Mr. Etter, I'm feeling that way about right now. Hey, come on, guys, hurtful. Okay, come on. He says, the glare on the walls is making me drowsy. Now watch this. He said he couldn't. He couldn't fix the problem. He couldn't dim the light. That's how it had been wired. It was all. Now, I know that seems like nothing. Mr. Etter, there's no meaning to that. No, there is. Camus is using this as his first example of an indicator of the impossible dilemma. Think about it. You're sitting in a room, the walls are very white, and for some reason, the white glare of the light makes you drowsy. Now, what's the alternative? Well, you can't dim the light. It wasn't wired that way. So the only other alternative is to turn off the light. Well, if the glare of the light makes you drowsy, what's going to happen when you turn off the lights? Then you're really going to get drowsy. Okay, turn off the lights, then you're just going to fall asleep. You see the impossible dilemma here. Caught between a rock and a hard place. or pardon my French. Okay, now this is an expression. So I'm gonna use it's kind of a mature word here. My mother used to say, damned if you do, damned if you don't. In other words, it doesn't matter what decision you make. It's an impossible dilemma. There's no way out. So that's the first one. Now, moving right along, even at the bottom of that same page, he says, because I'd had my eyes closed, the whiteness of the room seemed even brighter than before. So in other words, the absurdity of the universe is pressing in upon me, and it's becoming even stronger and more difficult for me to deal with. There wasn't a shadow anywhere in front of me, and every object, every angle and curve stood out so sharply, it made my eyes hurt. All right. Skip over about 7 or 8 pages. Again, if you have the same version I'm using, I'm on page 15. The sky was already filled with light, if you can find that paragraph. The sun was bearing down on the earth, and it was getting hotter by the minute. Now, Camus is setting us up here. He's given these several references to the uncomfortable nature of the sun. Now, look, we all like to be in the sun. We all like to be at the beach. But with our swimsuits on, right? Running around in proper swimsuit attire, and it feels good and it's fun. If you're out in that kind of weather and you've got like a turtleneck sweater or a winter coat or whatever, it feels awful. You just feel like, your body is burning up. I was hot in my dark clothes. So not only does he have a lot of clothes on, he has layers, and they're black. Black attracts heat. Camus is setting us up here. He's making sure that we, the reader, can almost feel the oppressiveness of the heat. Bottom of page 15. The sun bearing down, making the whole landscape shimmer with heat. It was inhuman and oppressive. That is the universe, according to Albert Camus. Now, here's the next impossible dilemma. The glare from the sky was unbearable. The tar had burst open in the sun. And then, bottom of page 17. Now, remember, the whole context here is his mother's funeral. They're walking to the church. And I'm at the paragraph that says, after that, everything seemed to happen so fast, so deliberately, so naturally. I don't remember any of it anymore, except for one thing. As we entered the village, the nurse spoke to me. She had a remarkable voice, which didn't go with her face at all, melodious, quavering voice. And she said, now listen, here it is. If you go slowly, remember, this is walking in the heat. If you go slowly, you risk getting sunstroke. But if you go too fast, then you work up a sweat, and then you'll catch a chill inside the church. Now watch this, wait for it. She was right. There was no way out. Here you are. I remember many, many years ago, I spent an entire summer in Arizona. Now, look, I know some of you live in places where you're used to this. I was not. I went to Arizona. The hottest weather I'd ever been in was 116 degrees when I was in Arizona. It felt like when you opened the front door of your house that there were 100 people standing there with hair dryers on full blast, just, and you're like, okay. That's what I remember about this oppressive. You should not stay out in it for any length of time at all. Our bodies just can't handle it. So the nurse says, boy, this is really a tough one. You can't walk slowly because then you're out in the heat. But if you walk fast, then you're walking fast in super, super, super hot temperatures. And then you work up more of a sweat. Then you go into this cool building and you'll catch a chill. There was no way out. That, my friends, is the way Albert Camus viewed the nature of the universe. There's no good solution. We crave meaning, we want it, but there's no such thing. The glare on the walls from the light is making me drowsy, but you can't dim the lights. And if you cut them out, then you're definitely going to fall asleep. It is a philosophy ultimately of hopelessness and despair. Chapter 2. Now, chapter 2, that's the day of the funeral. Chapter 2 is the day after the funeral. He goes swimming with Marie. If you notice the tone here, seems like he's not really upset about the fact that his mother died. My father passed away 3.5 years ago. And I am still bothered by it every day. I still miss him every day. The day after his mother's funeral, and he's just like, oh, well, she died. I don't know. It doesn't really mean anything. And he goes swimming and he's just sort of living his life. They go see a movie. And then the only thing I want to point out in chapter 2 is the very, very, very end of the chapter. Last words. It occurred to me that anyway, one more Sunday was over. Mama was buried now. I was going back to work, and that really nothing had changed. Oh, so bleak. Mom is gone. Another day's gone by. Another week's gone by. I go to work. I come home. Blah, blah, blah. None of it has any eternal significance, any transcendent meaning. Now, the last chapter we're going to cover in this video is chapter 3. So the next day, he goes to work. He leaves with one of his friends, Emmanuel. He's a fellow worker there. They talk to a mutual friend named Celeste. They meet up with Salamano. I'm going to make some references to these people in later videos, especially Salamano, who he's the guy with the dog. But he runs into his neighbor, Raymond. And he's going to spend quite a bit of time with Raymond. And just so I want to point out to you, in case it wasn't clear to you in the story here, kind of a mature issue. Raymond is what I guess today we would call a pimp. Yeah, there's probably another word for it that I'm not thinking of right now, but a pimp is a terrible thing. A pimp is a disgusting thing. I can't think of anything redeeming or good to say about someone who's a pimp, because a pimp is the guy who basically controls and manages prostitutes. And he takes their money and he promises to take care of them and give them some of the money they earn, but frequently they are abused and controlled by him in ways that are inhumane. And that's what Raymond is. He is a prostitute. I'm sorry, a pimp. No, he's not a prostitute himself. Now, the only other thing I wanted to point out, actually, no. We'll be doing chapter 4 in the next one. So think about that. Raymond also is an abuser of women. He's a pimp. But in this worldview, does that mean anything? Does it matter? Not really. I mean, he's a pimp. He's not a pimp. He abuses women. He doesn't abuse women. Mama died. Another week went by. What if she hadn't died? What if another week hadn't gone by? None of it really matters, because none of it has any ultimate transcendent meaning and purpose. Now, we're going to see how Camus takes Meursault, the main character. Remember, we're going to be looking for that climactic moment. I already kind of let the cat out of the bag and told you that it takes place near the end of part 1. There are just 2 big parts here, and the individual parts have several chapters in them. Be looking for that. Be looking for the rising action. I think Camus does a very good job, and it's very clear to spot and see. Check it out, and I will see you in the next video, my friends. Mon ami.